almost, I think, a period of 46 years. So it is great to be with all of you. So initially, I will just give some sort of introduction for some time. Yeah, what I was doing in the along for the physics, and then I went to the Geological Survey of India, and afterwards I worked with IUCAA. So I will talk about that, and then briefly I will talk about my work in Geological Survey of India, where I worked in different fields like mineral exploration, then seismology, setting up seismological observatories, working for different projects like preservation of yeah, monuments of Ajanta and Ellora. And then I worked with our marine wing, aerial wing, and finally after retirement, I got associated with IUCAA. So yeah, let me start. First, let me thank actually Professor Rohini Godbole, who who is who was a who is a actually good friend of me, and because we are from that NTS group, National Science Talent Search Scheme group, and we are together in number of summer school also. And so recently, when she came in contact, she persisted that I should join with this platform and talk about my experiences in different fields. And as you know, yeah, I was there about 46 years back. So 46 years, of course, for one human being, it is quite a long time. So I can say that because of my geological profession, it is something like Mesozoic era when the dinosaurs were roaming the earth. For us also, this campus was very much brand new that time. And library was also recently shifted. And even the road outside the university campus was very narrow with very, very few buses running here and there. And for me, a student of Ruya College and staying at Dadar, it was really adventure to come to Kalina campus from Santacruz railway station at that time. And we were actually few die-hard physics lovers those days, like Sharat Kelkar, who is also one of the student with me in Department of Physics that time. Presently, he's at after working in the Los Alamos lab, he is in the States. Then Sudhir Pandit, Ravindra Atle, Prashant Valanju, we are all in Ruya College. And from that NSTS group, who had sort of wedded with this subject, and the main topic of discussions of ours used to be Feynman and Schrodinger. At that time, actually, we were so much devoted for this subject. And Sharat Kelkar and myself, we had no actually second thought that we should be pursuing physics for MSc. Already Prashant Valanju, one of our other friend, had joined with the department just previous year. So both of us also took admission to department. And that time, actually, we had no other thoughts and least cared about means what really we can do after doing this MSc in physics and how we can go in the job market. For us, it was only the love of the subject, that's all. Let me tell something about the family background of myself. My father and mother were both actually teachers way back in 50s. And afterwards, my father was in writing and publishing in an educational field. And both of us are actually very much particular for our educational requirement, despite very tight economic constraints. I was very fortunate to be student of Balmon Vidya Mandir at Dadar. And we had wonderful company of friends who were very much interested in science, maths, astronomy, like Arun Kulkarni and again Sharat Kelkar and myself. We were together right from school, then Ramnarayan Ruya College, and also Department of Physics. So really very long association. And I stayed at Old Dadar West, just 5 minutes walk from the Dadar Sea Beach. we can hardly actually imagine that now, because all the total area is covered with building. That time during my childhood, there were vegetable gardens with hundreds of coconut trees around us. And there was no electricity in my house until I entered first year of college. Then I myself, along with my all the classmates, most of the classmates took admission in Priya College of Matunga. There I met Ajit Kembhui, who later went on to become astrophysicist and director of IUCAA. We had great time in Priya College, both academically as well as for hiking all the way around Sahyadri, part of the Western Ghat Mountains. And then when we came to UDP, it was really a great time. We had a wonderful, actually, all student association, and then lecturers, renowned lecturers like Professor Rangawala, Arvind Kumar, MC Joshi, and other teachers. So those lectures, I still remember those lectures and the discussions which used to go on. Then after that, as already told, that just a couple of years I was in Kanpur IIT, and then I came to BRC with a group of Dr. Nataraj Sharma, Dr. P.K. Bhattacharya, and Apurva. And that time also, though I was fascinated by physics, but at the same time, I had also fascination for different branches in science. So while in BRC, I did a lot of reading in different branches of our sciences like geology, geomagnetism, geophysics, and so on. And secondly, even though being from Mumbai, I had actually deep love for outdoor life. And so that's why we used to go for so many treks all around Sahyadri Mountains. Then finally, I sat for the UPSC geophysicist UPSC examination. I did quite good there. And finally, I joined geosciences. And I should say, really, it gave me the chance to take up adventurous field explorations, both for this metallic and non-metallic mineral exploration, as well as for other metals like molybdenum, gold. Then my efforts, along with my team of geophysicists of Southern region, where I was in Hyderabad for some time, we were successful in working with geophysical surveys for tracing out the deep geological structures which had given rise to the the coal, very big coal deposits there, and we had some success there. Afterwards, I entered into seismological studies to become a seismologist and study seismic activity, including major earthquakes like Kutch earthquake of 2001, 26 January 2001. Then Digliplu earthquake of Andaman Nicobar of September 2002. I set up the first earthquake monitoring network with digital seismometer in Andaman Nicobar area, covering the different islands all over the Andaman archipelago in 2002. I also was successful in establishing the first permanent Nagpur Seismological Observatory at Nagpur in collaboration with IMD. Then in 2000, we set up the permanent network of seismological observatories in Khandwa area to understand the swarm of very low magnitude earthquakes in 1998. In 2004, I led the efforts of Geological Survey of India to carry out Bombay seismic microzonation studies. Now, though I had actually my all education had taken place in Mumbai, our Geological Survey of India branch office is only at Nagpur and not in Mumbai. And so I had not much actually got opportunity to work in this area. But because of the Mumbai microsolution studies, which I worked along with my colleagues in 2004, I could study the new Bombay and our main Bombay like this Dadar, Mahim, Ghatkopar, all those area for the microsolution studies. And that has given some very good results. And I hope those results could be useful for when new structures, especially very big towers and other things are coming up in Mumbai area. My fieldwork days were full of daily adventure for designing the correct geophysical methods for exploration of minerals, for understanding the subsurface geological structures. And there, the laboratory, generally by laboratory, we mean just at the most few rooms or a building. There, your laboratory is the whole earth, all the surface which is open to us, and where you try with different methods, gravity, magnetic, electromagnetic, resistivity, and try to understand why the particular formations have come up and what could be there at the depth, what different formation along with the minerals could have come up there. In GSI, we took up a program. Yes. In GSI, we took up the program for setting up national network of observatories. Accordingly, the observatories were set up by our group at Agartala, Gangtok, Nagpur, where I myself was involved, and also at Jabalpur. We also planned to set up a seismological observatory at Andaman Nicobar. Accordingly, we took up a adventurous visit to Barren Volcano Island, which is presently the only active volcano in Indian territory. It is located about 140 kilometers northeast of Port Blair's town. We went by our Samudra Manthan ship from Port Blair to the vicinity of the Barren Volcano Island. We could see the red lava fountains spewing from the craters and the red hot rock pieces being known as volcano bombs to considerable height in the air. During the daytime, we saw the ash clouds being thrown in the air to considerable height. In the morning, we came near the island. That time, the island had developed natural beach, but those beaches are not like the beach which we see at Goa or even at Bombay. They were just actually few meters width. So from the main ship, we got down in a rubber dinghy, motorized rubber dinghy, and then came near that beach, and then finally waded through knee-deep water to approach the tiny beach. Along with my colleague, we climbed on the actually where the main volcano just adjacent to that there were some hills were there. So we climbed up those sharp razor edge tree covered hills, which are actually were the very much recently thrown out by as a lava, and then those lava is actually solidified. And there our main mission was to select a good place where we can put up the seismological observatory to try to understand how the different events are taking place, volcanic events are taking place. Then afterwards, I also headed the geophysical stream of our marine wing to plan the expansion of the marine surveys, which included planning for having another ship with modern geophysical exploration, for studying the deep sea beds in the Indian territory. I also headed our remote sensing and aerial survey wing and played a role for having a survey helicopter fitted with gravity, magnetic, and electromagnetic aerial survey instruments after a visit to Canada, and plan for ambitious program for covering whole of India with aerial gravitational surveys. As head of geophysical team in GSI, I also got opportunity for planning collaboration with scientific institutions working in geoscience field in Australia during visit to Australia as a part of Indian delegation of geoscientists. So this is all about my work in Geological Survey of India. Then after I retired there in 2011, I got associated with IUCAA, Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, for the novel international program of detection of gravitational waves. By now, that time, India had just entered for planning of setting up gravitational wave observatory in world. Already you know that three observatories are running presently in the world. Two are in the USA, one is at Hanford in the Washington state, one is at Livingston at Louisiana, and the third one is at is what is known as actually Virgo collaboration, that is near Pisa in Italy, in Europe. So so the idea was that one more observatory which is at sufficient distance from these three observatories should come up, so that should be able to pinpoint the sources which we are detecting in the during the detection and the monitoring of these gravitational waves. In 2015 itself, a black hole merger event at a distance of 1.3 billion light years come up, which is known as GW150914. This was first time detection of the gravitational wave, as well as to know that really merging of the black holes is taking place. And this was announced on 11 February 2016. And as an outcome of this theory, which is really a proof of human ingenuity, Einstein himself had predicted the existence of gravitational waves in 1916. However, he had his own doubts, as he had recognized the tremendous technological challenges of measurement of very small amplitudes of the waves as they reach from the astronomical distances. The confirmation of general theory of relativity, the general theory of gravitation started arriving in 1900 itself through the work of Eddington, when he observed the shifting of the astral paths during the solar eclipse. However, it took exactly 100 years to confirm the prediction of gravitational waves through the LIGO observatories. So as I already told that LIGO USA, accordingly they started thinking that there has to be one third observatory has to come up. So accordingly, and already India was ripe for this particular observatory because we had good many theoreticians who are working in the gravitational wave physics. And somewhere in 2012, I had discussions with Director IUCAA and the coordinator for LIGO, and got conversant with the LIGO project. Then that time I prepared a report showing the future map, how actually we can go about for searching the site for this particular project in India. Because actually there are a lot of critical constraints for the particular site, which that it is something like this, that this site itself, it is a part of that, that is the land itself and the surrounding. That itself is actually laboratory for this particular project. So it really required a lot of efforts for finding out these sites in USA as well as in India. already I had some experience regarding noise studies. Yeah, we did it for the preservation of the monuments and Ajanta and Ellora. And also when one has to establish seismological observatories, one has to study what is the noise background there. Because if already the noise background is high, it is not possible to pick up the signals from the earthquakes. So I had some experience regarding that. So that experience was useful when carrying out seismological studies for finding out the site for this LIGO observatory. Now, the main problem with the gravitational waves is that the gravitational waves are created by the huge objects like black holes, supernovas, and neutron stars. When these binary objects like neutron stars and black holes, they collide, then after their merger, they emit the tremendous amount of energy. So huge energy is created. But at the same time, these objects are quite a far distance. And the other factor is that the amplitude, the gravitational amplitude, gravitational wave amplitude, there is actually a factor of c raised to 4, that is the velocity of the light. That much factor is there in the denominator. So with that, the amplitude comes very much down.
Sir, are you sharing a PPT or something? Because we don't see anything. You're not
Hello.
seeing the screen.
Yeah, are you getting this one? Yeah.
No.
My
no,
talk.
No, we can hear you, but we don't see your PPT.
Yes, yeah. Now I look here. Now I will come to that.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. So with this background, actually, I will because there is not much of time in Geological Survey of India. Hello, are you seeing this PPT?
Not yet, sir. Not yet.
Oh,
No.
Let me see.
You have to go to the share screen option.
Yes. Yeah.
One.
I will do that. Hello, are you getting it now? Are you seeing the
Yes.
PPT? Yes.
Yeah,
So in Geological Survey of India, I carried out number of different types of work, and as well as exploration studies and this one. So yeah, it is not possible to cover even many of those important things. But one important study I will cover here, that is the site response studies and MEQ, that is micro earthquake studies for seismic hazard and risk microzonation of Mumbai area. Now, as such, from Geological Survey of India, we covered number of cities, say like Jabalpur. Then also, I think IMD had covered in Delhi, and Geological Survey of India took up the study of Koina and Mumbai. And during this Mumbai microzonation study, I was there and I led the geophysical part. And what we did, actually, we had number of seismometers, short period seismometers, and those we established at different places in Mumbai. And Mumbai, as we know, it is a very, very busy city. So it was very difficult to get some areas where to put up these seismometers. However, we actually studied the Mumbai map, and then afterwards we took up this work. So this work was actually of two types. One was establishment of MEQ network, and that is a micro earthquake network. So we had 5 seismometers placed at different places in Bombay permanently. Say one was in the near the Sion Fort, one was near the Canary Caves, one was at Ghatkopar. So like that, different places we had places. And so whatever seismic background activity in around Mumbai that is taking place, so that network was recording it. Now, there are some faults like Panvel flexures, that is near Bombay, and other faults, of course, this Koina earthquake faults are there. That is quite far away, but at the same time, those Koina earthquake we very much felt at Mumbai. So means there are actually two aspects. One is what could be the earthquake potential right in Mumbai itself, and other thing is that even if the earthquake has taken place little far away, say something like in Koina or in Nashik, somewhere in Pune, then those waves can still actually travel to Mumbai, and because of, as you know, Mumbai's lot of actually reclamation is there. That means essentially the surface part, that is mostly it is kind of a silt, sand, that kind of sediments are there. And just below that, there is a Deccan Trap volcanics are there, which is quite a good basement. And for example, near Andheri, Malad, and those areas, you could see the exposures of this volcanic sediment. But in your Kalina, you won't see those basement exposure. All the top sediments, those are actually comparatively soft sediments like mud and sand is there. Of course, when you are having a building, that time mostly that is excavated, and then lot of cement concreting is done. But however, where proper care is not taken, then this interaction between the basement and the top soil part. So when the outside waves come, earthquake waves. So for example, there is a earthquake fault here, and here there is some displacement has taken place, then waves will be generated, primary waves, secondary waves, then the Rayleigh waves, low waves, etc. And where they will be reaching to the basement and then to the surface, then of course the vibration will be reaching. But however, as there are no soft sediments on the top, here comparatively not much damage will be there. But however, in this particular setting where there are sediments, and right over the sediments, these particular buildings have come up, then there will be interaction between this basement, hard rock basement, and the sediments. What happens in the basement, actually good amount, velocity is comparatively larger. Mostly for the damage, it is the S waves, that is the secondary waves, that is important. Shear wave velocity, shear waves, those are important. They are, both the things are there. One is they are having a certain velocity, something like 3.8 kilometers per second. And other thing is that they have got higher amplitude. So that high amplitude matters. And other thing is their shaking. As you know, these P primary waves, they are mostly actually compressional. That means the shaking will take place along the direction of the motion itself. But in the shear wave, it will be to the perpendicular. So that means there will be a lot of horizontal shaking. If there is a vertical shaking, of course, the building will go up and go down, but that won't produce that much of damage. But there is a lot of horizontal shaking is there, then there is very big danger of those particular dwellings, buildings, those things can collapse due to the horizontal displacement. And so for the earthquake damage, these shear waves, those are very important. Then for the, as I told, when there is a kind of a soft sediments right over the basement, then good amount of damage can take place. And what happens is that when those waves are coming from the basement and just touch the soft sediment, there is a velocity change. And because of the velocity change, however, the energy has to be conserved. So in turn, there will be increase in the amplitude of the waves. And because of the increase in the amplitude, it can be as much as 2 to 3 times. And because of the increase in amplitude, already a lot of horizontal displacement is there. And if there is this soft sediment effect is there, then very lot of damage can take place. So these are the factors which are responsible for amplification. Then there is a methodology which I'll discuss. Then of course, other things are there, data processing and present. So so what is site response? So already I have talked about, briefly I talked about it. The amplitude of the earthquake ground motion also amplified quite a lot the movement. Your internet connection is unstable. Is it all right now?
Yes, sir, we can see your.
Yes.
Little cut.
Yeah. Yes. Let me take. Yeah. I think it is all right now. Then in case there are any topographical irregularities, that is up and down, that also matters. And some kind of amplification can take place at these mounts. Then there are good many examples where such kind of a damaging effects of the site amplification has taken place. The famous is the Mexico earthquakes of 1985. Actually, you know, the Mexico City is essentially over the older lake sediments. That means some kind of a paleo lake was there, but totally dried up now. But however, those sediments are there. And over that, the development has taken place. So when in 1985, actually the earthquake took place in the ocean. But when those waves came, the damage as such, it was not there much, yeah, because already it was in the sea. But when those waves came on the land, then yeah, at the Mexico City, there was a lot of damage because the Mexico City was sitting on the sediments, and there was the basement and the sediment, that interaction was there. And there was a lot of amplification, and there was a heavy damage in terms of falling of the building and the destruction of the Mexico City. Then as far as Indian example is concerned, Bhuj earthquake of 2001, 26 January. That is a major. So this kind of a damage, very major damage was there in the Bhuj city itself. And secondly, also at the Ahmedabad. Now, Ahmedabad is a very typical example of this site amplification damage. Ahmedabad is, as such, it is quite far away, about 150 kilometers away from the Kutch. And in between, there was comparable damage one, but Ahmedabad city is sitting over the sediments, and it is kind of a sedimentary basin. And when these surface waves came, they oscillated the whole sedimentary basin over which the Ahmedabad city. And because of that, there was a lot of damage of the multi-story building at Ahmedabad. So this particular site amplification and the corresponding damage is very much real. Then once we do the site response study, afterwards we can use, means basically what we'll be getting how much site amplification can take place in case the earthquake comes. So with this method that we can find out. We are essentially doing noise studies, and then we can find out how much amplification could be there at a particular area. And secondly, at what frequency. So that can be used for accordingly planning your buildings. And also when already some, even if the building damage is there, then how you can retrofit it, how you can change it by taking into account this particular knowledge which you are having, because we know now what sort of frequencies are involved. So accordingly, we can change the frequencies of those particular structures. Secondly, when we know that this earthquake damage is taking place in a particular area, then those high damage areas we can avoid. That will be very important for placing your hospitals, then very much control government buildings like fire brigade and other things. So accordingly, at least those particular areas could be avoided by this kind of, though however it is not possible in a city like Mumbai, where land is not available, whatever is available, one has to use it. But even then, one can do sort of a zonation and use comparatively safer zones for these public utilities. Then, these are just to give an idea exactly on what factors this amplification depends. Now, any sedimentary or soil layer is there, it will have certain kind of impedance. And how much shaking will be there, it will be depend on the impedance. Large impedance means it is comparatively safer layer. Then suppose the layer with impedance I1 over the basement with impedance I2. That means the sedimentary layer is having impedance I1 and basement layer is impedance I2. Then the amplification is given by this formula. 1/1 I1 by I2 plus, and this is the damping. This sort of act in a opposite ways. And with this, we can find out, then we can study actually the impedances, and impedance itself depend on your density as well as the shear wave velocity. So larger the shear wave velocity, that means suppose it is basement rock like a granite or Deccan trap, then the shear wave velocity will be larger, and then accordingly impedance will be also larger. Then other factor is resonance frequency. Suppose the earthquake waves are coming and they are having their own frequencies. And if that frequency matches with the frequency of the sedimentary layers, then those layers are going to vibrate with a much more amplitude. And so accordingly, that means when you are building any structure, we should avoid those resonance frequencies. And these resonance frequencies are given by shear wave velocity divided by the thickness of the sedimentary layer. Then there are also resonance period associated with a given civil structure, like say number of stories divided by 10. That means the 10-story buildings is going to have a resonance frequency of 1. So like that, different structures will have different resonance. So accordingly, civil engineers will have to take account into this picture, and they should also take into account those particular descriptive zone and whatever the resonance frequency is there, and accordingly they should plan the civil structures. Then essentially what we are doing is so one is by our micro earthquake, by that network, we are trying to find what are the earthquakes, what are the earthquake faults which could be present nearby. And in the actual, this particular site response study, what we are doing, say at any place, any given area we study, you place the seismometer there, and using the background noise itself. The noise could be coming from the traffic, then finally it creates actually some kind of a surface noise, what are known as actually relay wave noise. And from that, that noise will be actually recorded. And from that, we are extracting out what could be the how much site amplification can come and what could be the resonance frequency. So that is Nakamura from Japan. He has done actually some work over that. And essentially we are using those particular techniques to find out these two parameters. Then this is actually flow chart for doing that particular analysis. So essentially what we are doing is we are taking a ratio of the horizontal to vertical spectral ratio, that is a Fourier transform ratio. And then you plot it. And so for a given area, you will get certain amplification as well as you can find out the spectral frequency. So these are the areas. This is the map of Mumbai, and these different places we put our seismometers and studied those areas. And this is the contour map for maximum site. That is for any given area, we will try to contour it. Actually, these are the latitude and longitudes are there, which are masked because these maps are restricted. And so you will get different actually particular zones. What are the amplifications are there? So you can mark, and then accordingly this can be shared with the civil engineers. Then similarly, peak frequency, by plotting this frequency against the site amplification, you will get that particular at frequency it is getting maximum. So that is actually your resonance frequency. So that also should be actually. And then for a given area, these frequencies can be found out and can be contoured. And so as a whole, so accordingly, this particular information is also shared with the civil engineers. So in Mumbai, generally we are getting 0.2 to 15 hertz. Those are the resonance frequencies. Then very major site amplification has been observed at number of at majority of sites. Of course, that is very much natural because Bombay, if you just forget about these hills from Andheri, Malad, or like Malabar Hill, then rest of the area which is having lower elevation, it is really actually it was all totally marshy land. Even Kalina is also that kind of a. Previously it was a marshy land only. Kalina, Santa Cruz, and other things. So that means a lot of care has to be taken place when you are building. You are building there. So this is all about the one project which we carried out in Geological Survey of India. Then now I will go to the other work, that is what I carried out with IUCAA, that is for the LIGO. Are there any questions regarding this?
Can I ask one question?
Yes, yes.
Did you do some correlation study between different this microseismometers within the same location? Like Bombay, you had say maybe 100 of them. Did you do some correlation between one to the other? Because if there was a seismic wave, then there may be a little delay in reaching one sensor to the other, but each must trigger at the same time. So did you do some correlation work?
Yeah. Actually, the seismometers which you are keeping, they are not kept at the same time. They were kept at all different times. That means a given area was chosen, and then the sensor was kept there, for about say a few hours, and the noise measurement was done, and those noise windows we had studied. And similarly, next day you cover a different area. So
Oh, so you have not done simultaneous in
no,
different
it
areas.
is not. But however, that simultaneously it is done for the MEQ study, that is the micro earthquake study. So for that, we had kept about uh, uh, 5 seismometers at different places. As I already told, one was kept at Canary Caves, one near this Sign Fort, one was in Ghatkopar, so like that. So that we had kept it simultaneously. So for that, whenever some earthquake wave is coming, naturally it will get recorded at all these 5. And those with that correlation study, we can try to find out at what distance that particular earthquake is coming, from what depth it is coming, the magnitude of the movement. So all that we can find it out. Yes,
Thank you, sir.
yes. So now I will go to the other part, that is the LIGO. Yes. This particular picture at so many places, 2 black holes or neutron star rotating around each other. I think Bala Iyer had covered most of this part, the theoretical part for the gravitational waves. So I won't go much into that. So basically, because the space-time structure as a whole get modified by the masses, and the mass in turns affect the space-time structure.
Excuse me, sir. Are you showing a PPT? Because we are
Yes,
still.
are you not seeing this? One minute,
No.
1 minute. So this was the first one. Yeah. Binary compact objects rotating around each other and finally merging. So there are different kinds of gravitational sources, like compact binary in spiral, that is the neutron stars or black holes, then the rotating supernovas, then the pulsars, and secondly, stochastic cosmological signal itself, that is the CMB, which has come right at the Big Bang itself. Now, the main thing is that it is a huge challenge for detection of these gravitational waves. And that's why even Einstein told some 100 years back that it is almost actually impractical. They go down, as well as at the same time, is it all right now? Hello.
Yes, sir.
It is
Yes.
visible. It is
Yeah.
visible on screen.
So, and the main factor is that c raised to 4, that is the velocity of the light raised to 4 at the denominator. So the amplitude goes very much down. And by the time we are recording at the Earth here, they are of the order of 10 raised to minus 19, minus 20 meters. That means something like even 10,000 times smaller than even the proton diameter. That means your technology has to evolve to that extent so that you are able to do those measurements. So that was indeed a very, very great challenge. So that's why this technology did not evolve in one day. It came almost about in somewhere in 1960s, 70s. Weber tried through the sort of a metal cylinders, and unfortunately he could not actually though he claimed it, others could not repeat that experiment for the detection of the gravitational waves. And only when the idea of the somewhere in the 80s that the Michelson interferometer should be used for that, and Ronald Drever and Stanley Whitbrook, they actually worked on a small, some 40-meter Michelson interferometer in Caltech. And after that, slowly it started evolving. And over a period of about 40 years, it has come to actually present state. So suppose there are free particles here and the wave is coming perpendicular to this plane here, then the gravitational actually motion will come in two polarization. One is it gets compressed and then expanded like this and compressed like this. So that, and other is the actually 45-degree polarization. And to measure this kind of thing, that means you must have kind of actually free masses at the ends here. So that is the idea of using the Michelson interferometer. You are having a very big free mass in form of optical mirrors at the ends, and they are as big as some 40 kgs. But at the same time, they are actually hanging through silica threads. Then there are a lot of actually, to remove the coupling between the Earth's surface and the mirrors, lot of different systems are put up there. So essentially it is a Michelson interferometer. And what happens when the gravitational waves come, it gets in one direction, there will be contraction, and other direction there is expansion. Similarly, afterwards, in this direction there is expansion, and in this direction there is a contraction. So in the actually when you have got Michelson interferometer, so you have got those end mirrors here. So you have got laser here, then beam splitter here. From here the light gets split up. One goes towards this arm, this is the arm, and one goes towards this arm. There is a fabricated cavity here, both the sides, and then from that both this laser beam, they get reflected at the ends, and they come back to the detector here, and here you will find actually fringes there. And when the gravitational wave will come, it will change the length of the arms. So say for example, this arm gets actually expanded. So there is going to be a change in the length between these arms, and accordingly the interference pattern will change. Those fringes will change, and so that means there will be change in the intensity that can be detected. And from that you can, and from that pattern, one can find out whether the gravitational wave was there. Now at the same time, this can happen even with the, say for example, big earthquake is there. Then also these mirrors can move, and that can give rise to movement, and then corresponding fringe changes will be there. So one has to eliminate whether it is a noise from a traffic, noise from earthquake, or the signal is really coming from a distance, from the black holes or from the neutron stars. Then in electromagnetic, we are actually studying over something like as much as 20 magnitude in the frequency range, right from the radio range to gamma. In gravitational waves, the range is comparatively smaller. It is something like 10 orders of magnitude. And here as you see, so yeah, these are the amplitudes or the strains, as you can see, and this is the frequency. And presently with LIGO, we are here. And where we are measuring the frequencies from say something like 20 hertz to maximum of the few hundred hertz. And the first particular actually the detection which took place, that was just in something like 60 hertz or something like that. So this is for the LIGO on the Earth surface. And similarly, same interferometer, you can keep it on the space itself. And this is known as LISA. That is the space antennas. And where the satellites will be separated by millions of kilometers. So that means your arm length you are extending. So naturally that advantage is there. But there you will be detecting actually the very, very small small frequency in the millihertz or something like that. That means the waves which are coming from the giant black holes from the galactic centers or something like that. Then when you set up your seismometer, your this one, LIGO interferometers, then there are so many actually error problems are you have to eliminate, slowly eliminate. One is the seismic. That means, yeah, this is actually the area where we can study. And here the strain is going down, and we are presently in this particular range. But presently we are not able to go to this frequency because of these seismic disturbances. Then there are you are essentially operating in a beam tube in a Michelson interferometer where laser is there, and with a very high vacuum, a beam tube is there. So within that, there are some other errors like radiation pressures. Then there could be also gravity gradient. That means somebody is moving outside your interferometer. That itself will cause a kind of actually gravity change, and that can also actually affect your interferometer. So there are so many actually error factors can come into picture, and we have to take into consideration that. So essentially, this is the setup. This is your conversation where one arm is going like this for about 4 kilometers and another arm at perpendicular direction at another direction. And these are the end stations where the mirrors are kept. And here the laser is there, and also the splitter is there, so that the light gets split up and it goes, this arm and this particular arm gets reflected back, and there is another detector is also placed here. So to set up a LIGO interferometer, Michelson interferometer, you must have actually area something like this, 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer. And this is about, for a safety sake, we keep about 150 meters. And the actually beam tube is about 1.2 meter diameter. And around that beam tube, some kind of an enclosure will be there, like this. See, this is the beam tube through which the laser will be passing. And over this beam tube, some kind of a cement concrete enclosure is made so that it doesn't get disturbed by some outside vehicles or even gun firing or something like that. And this particular beam tube is going to be 4 kilometers long. And these are the kind of optical mirrors which has to be placed at the ends, from where the laser will get reflected at the end section, will get reflected and come back. And similarly from other arms also, that laser light will get reflected and come back and interfere, and then it will be detected in the detector. Now presently we are having this laser interferometer at 4 places. One is in the United States at 2 places. That is one this is at Hanford in Washington State and Livingston in Louisiana. Then there is Geo at Germany, and this is only 600 meters. That means it is not giving that much information, but at the same time, for R&D, this had been very useful for developing the optics. Then the Virgo laser interferometer, that is in the Italy near Pisa. This is 3 kilometers long. And now most recently, it has come up Kagra, that is at Kamioka gravitational wave interferometer, gravitational detector, what they call. And this is placed in Japan. This started in 2020. For a few months it was operated. Then afterwards, again because of the pandemic, this is also shut down. And now we are hoping again everything will start. And with all this, then there was an idea that we must have a interferometer, it quite at a distance from all these interferometers, so that we can increase our resolution or of finding this particular source in the sky. So for that, India was ideal, and accordingly, it will be coming up in India. It should be by 2024, it should be ready. So this place is in Hanford, Washington. So this is the main corner station where all that laser detector, splitter, everything is kept. Then this is the main arm. And at the end, there is a end station where the this mirror is placed, which will be reflecting the laser light. Similarly, this is the other arm, and this will also have a similar structure. So as you see, it is comparatively a barren area. So that is the main thing for these particular interferometers, that you should be quite away from the main civilization, so that you do not have that much of a traffic or other disturbances. This is the LIGO Livingston, Louisiana Observatory in the USA. Now, for this they have chosen, see, it is sort of actually marshy place. It is not a very much hard rock. So with the, so what, of course, naturally they had taken care to excavate, to have a proper excavation here. And then after that, they have laid out these all these pipes and all these observatories and laboratories. So already I had talked about this. In 2015, there was the first event known as GW 2015. 9 is for September, 14 September it was detected. And this was detected by both the observatories. That time only these two observatories were functioning. That is the Livingston, Louisiana, and the Hanford, Washington. This is the waveform recorded at this observatory. This is at the Livingston, where it came first, and after an interval of 7 milliseconds, because both observatories are separated by something like 3,000 kilometers. Yeah, another signal came, and very similar, that you can see very similar signal. And both the things they are superimposed, and this they have also done what is known as match filtering to know what particular type of source could have given rise to this, and that they have matched with this, what is the waveform which is already observed. This is the famous cartoon for the black hole, how the merging of the black hole. So this is a total new era had been started with this kind of a discovery. And where from this came? So in the sky, this is the actually part of the sky. This is the Magellanic Cloud, that is the smaller galaxy near our Milky Way. And because presently that much resolution is not there, so you could say that it could be anywhere along this particular area. And because of my geological background, so I very much like this particular poster. Big Bang event took place something like 13.8 billion light years before. Then Sun, something like 4.6, 4.7, and then the Earth, after that Moon. And after that, the different kinds of lives, they started. And finally, and there was a gravitational wave, this particular event which took place, which was recorded on 14 September 2015. So that happened at 1.3 billion light years away, billion light years. And that means that much time also it had taken place. So all the time it was traveling. So it is very interesting. All the time it was traveling, the evolution was taking place on the Earth. slowly from the singular cells to multicellular life, everything actually evolved, slowly started evolving. Fish started coming on the earth, then the dinosaurs, birds, and slowly the mammals, and finally finally man came, and finally man has come to such a technological advancement that it could detect what has happened something like 1.3 billion light years away. So that is really, I should say, very much fantastic. Now, yeah, coming to, no, I hope I have, how much time I have got? Hello. These are the ambient noise surveys. That means just like as I did in the site response studies. So similar kind of studies we carried out here. So you place the seismometer at a particular area and study for number of days. And then from that, you find out different kinds of curves, how much noise is present in that, whether it can interfere when we place the interferometer there. So initially what we did, one must actually study how the earthquakes have happened throughout India. And there is already a seismic zonation map is there. And this is the seismic zone 2, this is shown in blue. This seismic zone 3, this is the Kutch earthquake site. Then the Himalaya is another very big source. So you have got seismic zone, very, very high seismic zone is there. And so naturally we are interested in the lowest seismic zone, which is shown by blue, seismic zone 2. And all this area I studied both by satellites as well as by the by putting the different kinds of seismometers in these particular areas. And we concentrated at different, initially I along with my colleagues visited these different kinds of something like 27 sites I visited. And from that, finally, we studied those from different geological and whatever already maps were there. So everything was studied. From that, we brought it down to 4 sites. And in those 4 sites, we put up the seismometers and did the noise studies. And then out of that, and after, and also from the other consideration, we came back, we selected the final site. So this is one site in Rajasthan. I'm myself there. And so like that, so for any given site, we had to discuss with the local authorities whether first that site should be available. Secondly, what are the development plans around that? And once we study, once we decide, okay, this site could be all right, then we put up seismometers there. So like that, we have put up seismometers. This is Professor Unni Krishnan from TIFR. So like that, we used to visit with our groups. Then this is Professor Tarun Saurdip from Ayuka. I presently IIS here. So he was actually coordinator for this project, myself and revenue officials. So we put up a seismometer there and studied. Then here myself is there, Tarun Samdeep. Then David Riste, who is the executive director of LIGO, who made the famous announcement of gravitational waves, the first detection of the gravitational waves. And Stanley Whitbrook, he was very much responsible for the development of this Michelson LIGO interferometer for this particular gravitational waves. Then in the same site, Professor Jain Narikar, we are very much fortunate that he also visited the site, and I'm telling him about the particular site. This is another site in Rajasthan. This is in Rajgarh district in Madhya Pradesh. So all these are actually different kinds of sites which I visited. Okay. And then we also use the satellite maps to derive different, because immediately you cannot get all sort of how much elevation is there, then what could be the means how the nalas are flowing and other things. So for that we have to use the GIS information. So use the satellite maps, and from that using different software like QGIS and ArcGIS, etc., extract the information regarding the means how much could be the topographic changes could be there. So like the three-dimensional features, what could be the, how is the topography there? So these are the elevation changes in along a particular arms. So like that we had to study. So you draw these arms over a particular site and then study how much could the elevation difference could come and what could be the different difficulties and problems could come up. This is the DAM map, that is the digital elevation map, digital elevation model. And then from that one can extract what are the contours, how the elevation is changing for a particular area. So this is the contour map which I prepared from those maps. This is the contour maps prepared. This is the PSD curve, probability spectral density curves, which we did for number of sites, and then compared with already at Hanford, this particular curve was studied. So it was like this. So this is against frequency, and this is the amplitude. That is how much power is there, power spectral density, and this was the Hanford curve. So we were quite happy to see that this particular sites which we are covering, which is having much lower noise, even compared to the LIGO sites. This is the maximum noise model, and this is the lowest noise model which is available. And this is red is the vertical component, and other green and blue are the horizontal components. So that way our noise curves were quite good, and we are happy with them. This is the PDF function, probability density functions. Actually, Professor Rajesh Nayak, he developed these particular curves. And so these are the actually different probabilities with, for example, the main curve is like this. This is the maximum probability. But there will be very small probability to get higher amplitude. So how much could be that? So that it was studied. for number of sites like this. And now similarly, we are also carrying out actually continuous seismic monitoring in the site which we have already selected, so that we can understand if already some it means what kind of actually traffic noise and other noises they can affect the interferometers. Then also try to correlation with if any canal operations or the nala flowing are there, how they are going to affect. So those studies we can means even before the LIGO interferometer is set up, these studies we can carry out and find out what sort of noise sources are there, and then accordingly we can interpret the data which you are finding out through the interferometer. So okay, so that is all I have to tell. Yes.